Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Wednesday afternoon workshop for the Dallas County Board of Commissioners. At this point, we have 9 panelists and 6 attendees participating by Zoom. We basically have one item on the agenda for our public session, and that's a review of the Consolidated Homeless Grant Application. And Gina James is here to go over that. We have an opportunity for miscellaneous for anything that people might want to bring to our attention. And there's either staff or citizens under citizen comment. And then we do anticipate going into executive session for 10 to 15 minutes to discuss contract negotiations. So with that in mind, welcome, Gina. Glad to have you back.
Thank you. Gina James, Health and Human Services. I wanted to come and start conversation today about the Consolidated Homeless Grant Application. We'll go over some of the specific grant information, talk about some of the program data and kind of what the process or next steps will be in terms of the grant application. The funding, so I handed you some slides and there are some extra copies up here for members of the public. On page 3 or slides 3, we talk about the funding. So the funding that's included in this grant, and the county has been participating in this particular grant since about 2011, 2012, right in there. And it may have been prior to that, but that was as far back as I could find in historical information. Included in this particular grant is a couple of different funding streams, including a new one this year. So the Housing and Essential Needs, or HEN, is included in this grant. The HEN funding is state funds that are approved by the legislature each year or each 2 years. So they set that money aside for HEN services that come through this grant. There's a funding stream called the Consolidated Homeless Grant Standard, which is our local document recording fees that go up to the state, and then they're awarded back in the form of a grant, which is this grant. I don't believe that this particular line is an exact return on our local document recording fees. I think there's a formula the state uses and whatnot. But it is the document recording fee money returning in a grant.
So that is not document recording fees that we include in our local. That's not our local match. That's a whole separate source. I mean, it's document recording fees, but it's the part that goes up to the state.
It's the part that goes to the state. Yeah. When we have our discussions about our local doc recording fees, that is all the portion that just stays at the county.
Yeah.
So this is the portion that gets split off and goes to the state, and then they send it back down this way.
Okay.
After they're cut, sure.
I'm sure. Yes.
Are these estimates, or are they fairly accurate? Do you know?
What are you looking at?
Just the dollar amounts you have here?
The award chart.
Yeah.
The estimate where it says estimated awards, that's an estimated amount for the next 2 years. We won't have an exact amount until after the end of the legislative session.
Yeah. Okay.
And when, excuse me, when you say consolidated, is HEN, for example, a set fraction of the consolidated amount of money, or it's just up to us within the big basket of goods?
It's a separate funding. So it's separated out in the budget, which I have in a couple slides, how the funding is kind of split up, and there's slightly different eligibility and uses for the
Right.
based on the funding.
But if we were interested in items A through C, but not item D, we'd have to take items A through D completely.
Yes, so the grant application is sort of an all or nothing approach. So we choose to submit the grant application and have all of these funding streams come to us in contract. We can't pick to apply for, just the HIN portion or just the CHG portion. It's a kind of an all or nothing. I did ask that question of this.
Oh, okay. And just to be clear, I was unaware, is this new, the homeless grant?
The Consolidated Homeless Grant is not new, but the eviction prevention is a new funding stream that's included this year. So, and that is our local document recording fees. This was the $100 increase that was approved last year in legislation. That is coming back to counties. And I believe that particular piece, it was written in the legislation that I do think Commerce still gets to take a little off, but it is supposed to be more of an equivalent of what is collected locally coming back to counties.
That's for the eviction prevention.
Correct.
Okay, so that was the $100 that went from 103 to $203.
Correct.
Okay,
So what comes as the CHG standard is that original doc fee amount coming back, and then the eviction prevention is from that $100 increase.
the original funding is not impacted by anything we do here. So we still gonna get the funding we got last year. If we refuse this, we'll get approximately the same amount of money. All other things being the same. In other words, we don't have to apply for this in order to get the doc recording fees.
For our local doc recording fees, no,
Okay,
Right,
thank you.
right, does not affect that. Yep. Yep.
So do the cities get a portion of the, of any of these? Do they also have access to these dollars?
They might in rare circumstances. So the process for this particular grant application, the state sends the grant application to counties. Counties get the first right of refusal to apply for these funds. If counties choose not to submit an application, the state will issue a request for proposals in our county and look for Cowlitz County providers who are interested in doing this work. Cities then could potentially apply in that case. They could also, I think sometimes the state will redistribute unspent funds, and I think cities may be eligible to apply in those situations as well. But the bulk of the grant, as I mentioned, it comes to counties for first right of refusal, and then it would get issued as an RFP to our local providers if we choose not to.
So the eviction prevention, you said, is a new feature of the consolidated grant.
Mhm.
Do you know the legislative history? Is this an attempt to continue the program, the eviction prevention programs that took place under the ARPA monies or the
Yes.
CARES Act?
Yep.
But it's just state funded now.
It's funded with that $100 document recording fee.
And so then we would be, if we receive this money because we've made a successful consolidated grant application, then we turn around and solicit requests from providers. So that if there's an agency that has been already doing a good job of eviction prevention, they would need to then apply as soon as our money becomes available if they want to continue.
Yes, we can issue a request for proposals to redistribute, to allocate this funding. The application that we turn in, we can identify a sub-grantee, and historically, it has carried forward that we have worked with Lower Columbia CAP in the past, and that has carried forward over the years. There's new funding now, and I know it's happened in the past where occasionally we'll get a random pot of funding come down and we'll issue a request for proposals to look for providers. So we can certainly do that with this funding.
I think we've talked about that before. that the conciliation mediation service has done a good
Right.
job. We certainly want to encourage
Mm.
them to be able to continue their programs to help people.
Yeah, I'm thinking along the same lines. I'm still puzzled here. This isn't, we can use this eviction prevention in any way we want as long as it's eviction prevention of some sort.
There are limitations. The program guidelines, and I'm going to apologize off the bat. They're 70 pages long, so I may not know all of the details off the top of my head. The eviction prevention funds can be used, let's see, the budget categories are admin, rent, and operations. And so, admin is the agency-wide support, rent is rent, operations typically supports staff time doing the work with clients, or like case management, that type of thing, doing the intake, the paperwork, keeping the client file, confirming the eligibility, all of those pieces. That's what the operations pays for. So within those three categories is how we can use the eviction prevention funding.
Okay, so it could be a rental assistance again.
Mhm.
We're not obligated to do rental assistance, though, are we?
That's the intent, is to use that eviction prevention money for rent assistance. Can I ask what you're thinking?
I am fairly adamant that rental assistance is contributing to the problem, not solving the problem. So I think the chairman mentioned a mediation group, and I think we should fund them to a greater amount than they've asked, but to start paying money again like we did for ERAP and those things, to me, that's the wrong thing to do. So
Okay.
if we go for the consolidated grant, are we forced into something? I mean, we want to look at all the caveats in here.
Mhm.
And
So if we were to support the mediation program, would that be their staff time?
that would be their staff time.
Okay.
It could be attorney time too, I suppose.
They do rent that space too.
Their offices.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's right. It could be facilities and time.
it could be some little bit of facilities in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question would be, can we use that particular funding to support eviction prevention efforts via that mediation work through staff time versus paying
Yeah.
for individual rent? I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, and I don't want to put words in Aaron's mouth, but I think we want more options than just the one we've had the last few years.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
And then these $100 from the eviction stuff, that is $100 that originated in Cowlitz only, only Cowlitz and only Cowlitz.
Yes, I believe that's how the legislation was written, to, as much as possible, have the money that was collected locally, returned locally.
Yeah, I get a little antsy when I hear words like as much as possible.
Well, there's, I think Commerce probably takes some.
Right, right. I would assume they didn't take 10% off the top before we even sneeze.
Yeah,
There's some formula that they use to determine how much comes
Yeah.
back to us.
and I think it is split into a couple different categories too. So that $100, if I remember right, in the legislation, it wasn't all written to go towards eviction prevention. There was a portion of it that is going towards eviction prevention, and a portion of it going towards, I think, the landlord mitigation program or something like that. And so some of it, I think, was allocated in different program areas. Um, Yep.
The hen portion, longstanding, includes personal items, personal hygiene and then access to vouchers for the
So-
housing part.
Right. So there's an essential needs component where individuals can get access to essential need items like shampoo or laundry soap, things like that. And then it can also help pay for an individual's rent. And I'll get into some of that. There's really specific eligibility for the hen piece in particular. We'll get into some of that. I wanted to go over some of the award chart that Commissioner Dahl mentioned. And just quickly, I had mentioned counties get first right of refusal, what that process looks like if we choose not to submit an application. The application is due April 28th. And so for today, I'm just hoping to have a lot of good discussion, maybe go back and try to answer some questions. The application itself is pretty brief and straightforward. So I don't anticipate it will take, if we do decide to submit it, it's not going to take a lot of time to complete. But it is due April 28th. So I'm hoping to, by then, see if we'd like to submit it or not. It is a 2-year contract, so it would be for July 1st, 2023 through June 30th of 2025. So I just wanted to mention that. So with the grant application, the state sent an estimated awards for each of the budget categories. So the final awards, we won't know until after the end of the legislative session, when all of the budget is finished being decided on. So you can see for Cowlitz County what they're estimating the CHG standard portion at a little over $785,000. That is for the whole 2 years. So that's a 2-year amount. The HIN funding is separated by each year, by each state fiscal year. So for state fiscal year 24, about 1.9 million in HIN funding, and the same for state fiscal year 25. The eviction prevention funding is also separated out by each state fiscal year. You'll see it's a little over $627,000 each year that they're estimating. So again, this could change depending on what happens through the rest of the legislative session. But this is just an estimate for right now. So
Typically a year in, they make an inflation adjustment, don't they? Isn't it one of the amendments that usually comes along?
they sometimes do. We haven't seen an amendment in a couple of years.
This one must
yeah.
be some other consolidated contract.
Yes. We occasionally will see too the state collect funds or deobligate funds that we have not spent. So that happens occasionally too. This year, we anticipate having unspent funds. We will probably see an amendment where they're going to unallocate some of our funds for this current grant cycle. So that does happen. We've not spent out this entire grant historically. I think, well, in the last few years, we've not completely spent this grant out. I think there was a time where it was a different case and the county was spending more of it. There's been a lot
So
of
when you
changes.
say the county didn't spend it, you really mean the providers we contract with haven't spent all the money, right?
Yeah,
Because we're not doing the HEN program. We contract.
Contracted
We
out.
have so
Yeah.
far.
yeah,
Contracted
yeah,
it out.
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of challenges with it. And, one we've experienced in the last few years was having an eviction moratorium. And so there was not a lot of people moving out of housing. Well, it's hard to get people into housing when nobody's moving out of housing. So there's been a lot of challenges the last few years in that sense, but so the grant total for this next round, all added up, is about $5.9 million. Yep.
And what does that compare last year? with,
sorry?
or with the last contract? How does that amount compare?
Last year, our contract was 4.9 million. I wrote down somewhere. I just looked at that before I left though. 4.9 million. That didn't include the eviction prevention.
So,
The-
so
the-
if you take away the $120,000, we're actually getting less.
We're actually, the HIN allocation is exactly the same as our current contract year. The CHG standard went up about $100,000. And then there's the new eviction prevention piece that's added in. So I'm not sure why the CHG standard went up. I was anticipating it to go down because we've started to see document recording fees go down. But maybe it will be different when they issue the final numbers.
Yeah, that could change.
Yeah.
So this is embarrassing. I don't quite understand, like the CHG number, that's for 2 years, approximately 380 per year.
Mhm.
Okay, and that comes out of that. We have the doc recording fees. That's totally independent to anything we're seeing here.
Correct. Our local document recording fees is completely separate.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, it gets really confusing because this is also document recording fees, but separate than when we talk about our local document recording fees. Okay, are there any questions? Any other questions on those awards? I mentioned,
I guess I'm just confused about what activities the that first category,
The CHG.
CHG, what does that actually go for? Is that administration and rent and?
it can be used, so it has the same kind of budget categories. So it can be admin, rent, or they call other housing costs, which could be like move-in assistance, something like that. And then operations, which is the staff time or case management. Actually, that was on the next slide. The allowable uses of the money, they're slightly different depending on the funding categories. Historically, what we have primarily used both the CHG and the HIN funding for is a tiny bit of homeless prevention but primarily rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is pays, it's rent assistance, but it's to get people into housing. So the bulk of the individuals served have been referred straight from homelessness to the program. So these are people that are coming right off the street and we're trying to get them into housing. And this funding, the rapid rehousing, can help to get them into housing, assist with some of those moving costs and help to pay their rent until they're stabilized and can transition out of the program. So the different categories, CHG is the most flexible funding source. So it can be used for a variety of interventions. You see they're all checked there for street outreach, emergency shelter, transitional housing, prevention, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing. The HIN funding is a little bit more limited. So you can't use it for emergency shelter, which makes sense. We wouldn't open a shelter and then say, only if you're HIN eligible, you can stay at this shelter. So, so that one, we can't use it for that, but we can use it for the other categories. Again, historically, we've used it primarily for rapid rehousing and a little bit of homeless prevention.
And you said rapid rehousing is rent vouchers or rent
It's-
assistance?
Yeah, rent assistance. Mhm. Yep.
And is that the category that some governments use to send people to hotels for housing?
It can be
Is that a
used.
rapid housing program?
It can be used for hotels.
We've not done that though locally, have we?
We've done it minimally. We have not done it as on a large scale. It's been, it's like some counties will reserve, a wing of rooms at a hotel and then place people in that way. We've not done it that way. It has been one-off situations where they'll get people in a hotel room temporarily while they help to, look for other housing. So part of that rapid rehousing process is to help an individual be ready to be a tenant and look for housing. It might be that they need an ID or something like that to be able to sign a lease or get into that type of situation. So they're working on those things with that individual and hopefully with the goal of getting them into housing and getting a lease signed and that type of thing. So,
And then we cut the permanent supportive housing portion recently. The group home.
that particular project was paid with our local document recording fees, not part of this grant.
And what do we use this for? Do we do anything with permanent supportive housing with?
We have not.
Okay.
I think partly because it's a very permanent commitment, it's basically saying we are going to forever pay for your housing. And so that's hard with a grant, I think, when the numbers can go up and down. So we historically have not used it for permanent supportive housing type projects, but it is an allowable use. And some counties receive a specific budget line that is solely intended for permanent supportive housing. So it is included in a lot of the program guidelines because there are some counties that receive a budget line for that. But it's not included in ours.
And again, by definition, permanent supportive housing goes to folks with disabilities.
Yes, yep. And the state, some of their funding, they'll say, it has to be used for chronically homeless, for individuals who meet that definition of being chronically homeless. That's who would be eligible for the permanent supportive housing.
But they haven't identified anybody like that for us, right?
That's not what they look at. We actually, at one point a few years ago, the state did allocate some of that specific funding to Cowlitz County as they allocated it to all counties. We had issued an RFP to try to utilize it and we got 0 responses for that. And so we let the state take that portion back. That
And,
could be an option in the future if there's interest in that, but yeah.
and the monies that we get in the grant have to be spent here in Cowlitz County.
Mhm.
And what I'm thinking is if we find out there are openings in another county, we can't send some of our homeless outside the county with these funds.
No, there is some flexibility, like if you're working with someone who is moving and they're moving to Lewis County, for example, the expectation is that you work with Lewis County then to transition that client. So if we were providing the assistance and the case management and they're moving units up to Lewis County, then we would work with Lewis County and transition that individual. But
So they wouldn't assume a bus ticket is working with them.
probably not.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how you want to define they're moving there.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, it must work for some counties because we seem to be getting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had mentioned the specific HIN eligibility. HIN is in Washington State RCW. It outlines kind of who's eligible and what that looks like. For this eligibility piece, I want to make sure to be clear that the state determines who's eligible for HIN. So individuals have to connect with our local DSHS office. And that's where the eligibility is determined. Once the eligibility is determined, an individual will get a letter saying, you're considered HIN eligible, you've met the eligibility requirements. That individual gets entered in the state's benefits verification system for what benefits they're eligible for. We have access to that system, so that's part of how we verify that someone is eligible for HIN.
Is that the HMIS?
The benefits verification system is
Different.
separate than HMIS, right? It will list just the state benefits that someone is eligible for. Yep. So to be eligible for HIN, an individual has to be determined, the state has to determine that they're incapacitated from gainful employment for a minimum of 90 days or more. That could be by reason of some type of physical condition like an injury, or it could be a mental condition as well. The state goes through a process where they make that determination through the eligibility determination.
So is that a program we can opt out of? We make this application, we just don't apply for the HIN portion.
No, the application is all or nothing. So we are applying for all of the funds or we're not submitting an application.
And if we decide to pass on the opportunity to apply for this grant, the money is spent elsewhere?
The money is still spent in Cowlitz County. The state will issue an RFP locally and solicit for Cowlitz County providers. Yep.
So pursuing that, if we get the grant and we don't spend all the money in any one category,
Mhm.
that goes back
Mhm.
to the government.
Yep. Yeah, sometimes the state will amend our contract and deobligate the funds. Sometimes they don't do that and it just stays with the state. We draw it down on a cost reimbursement basis. So whatever we don't spend just stays with the state.
So if they've overestimated the need, for example,
Mhm.
if conditions change, that would be one reason that they would readjust and reallocate.
Right. So like last year, let's see. I mentioned the last 2-year contract was about $4.5 million. So that's about $2,225,000 per year. We spent in 2022, we spent about 1.3 million. So the remainder of that is
Is that mostly HIN dollars that were unspent or?
mostly HIN. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And all of this stuff, we have to go through CAP or different agencies?
We can issue a request for proposals and
Okay.
make a determination about providers. One thing I will say though is that, right, CAP has been the provider for a number of years and they are currently serving clients. And so there may be a challenge if we choose a different provider, then, they have a client base that they're currently serving. So we'd just have to talk through what that would look like in terms of the clients they're currently serving, and would they transition to a new provider or would we allocate funds for them to support those existing clients? If that makes sense.
And some of these, we can issue grants out of this grant, right?
We can subcontract.
Right. And
Yeah.
can we do that to municipalities also?
I would imagine so. Mhm.
If they respond to our request for proposal.
If they responded, yeah.
Yeah. I look at the eviction prevention stuff and it's got to be more in the municipalities where eviction is a problem than out in the country, I would think.
Mm.
Yeah, I would guess that's true too.
Mhm.
And to repeat the question that the chairman asked a good deal earlier, the municipalities get their chunk also out of this?
No. So it first is presented to counties, but only to counties. They don't send a similar request to cities. So they could potentially access some of the funding if the state awards unspent funds or something like that, but not like this, not like we're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. These document recording fees are different than ones where the city of Longview said we want to do it ourselves.
Yes, they're tapping into the local
Yeah.
document recording fees.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so I mentioned to be HIN eligible, an individual has to be determined incapacitated from gainful employment for a minimum of 90 days. They have to be income eligible. And a couple years ago, the state added that if an individual is eligible for ABD, which is age blind or disabled, which is kind of a separate state benefit program. If someone's eligible for that program, then they can also be eligible for HIN if they meet the other if they meet the rest of the criteria as well. I also have listed TANF, but I want to say I may not have that assistance program listed correctly. The RCW says the Pregnant Women Assistance Program. And so there's these two other state benefit programs that if you're determined eligible for those, then you're considered to meet the financial eligibility for HIN. And I mentioned that because the HIN funding over the last few years, the state has awarded significantly more HIN funding because they have now roped in these other programs as also being eligible for HIN. And so it increased the number of people that are eligible. And so then the state awarded additional funding through HIN because of that. So a couple of the other eligibility pieces, you have to be a citizen or considered lawfully admitted for permanent residency in the United States, and you have to provide a social security number. So as I mentioned, the DSHS office verifies all of that eligibility, and then they enter it into the benefit verification system. There's really specific, there's some reasons the state calls out in the RCW that you are not eligible for HIN for certain reasons. So there's certain federal assistance that they will try to connect individuals to. And if you refuse to try to obtain that federal assistance, then they'll determine you not eligible for HIN. If you refuse or fail to participate in substance use treatment, they'll deny your HIN eligibility for that as well. And then if you're fleeing to avoid any type of prosecution for a felony or anything like that, they'll refuse you. I don't know how that would come up in conversation, but it's a specific disqualifier. And then I just wanted to mention too, that's all connected to the HIN eligibility piece. For the other funding for CHG and eviction prevention, it's a little bit more broad. So you have to be at risk of homelessness or currently homeless, and you have to have an income at or below 80% of the area median income to be eligible. The grant also, so in addition to these housing interventions that we've been talking about, the grant also requires other components. Some of these same components we see as requirements to administer our local document recording fees, but the grant also has requirements about the point in time count, doing that component, the 5-year plan, working on that, doing any updates, completing annual reports for that. The contract also sets requirements for the coordinated entry system. So those come through this grant as well. And then we're considered the HMIS lead, the Homeless Management Information System lead. What that means really is that anytime there's issues with projects that enter into that system in our county, the state reaches out to us first and says, hey, we noticed this or that. Can you connect with the provider? And we'll help to make corrections or anything like that. So I just wanted to mention those additional components. 'Cause those are in addition to just the housing interventions.
And we do all those 5 things.
We do all of those, yes. So some of the program data, so looking at, I pulled some data from 2021 and 2022. This is calendar year data. The contract is off of state fiscal year, but I wanted to get a full 2 years picture because the funding comes in 2 years. So even though they're slightly different cycles, I wanted it to mimic kind of how the funding's allocated. So as I mentioned, the interventions that we have primarily used the funding for are prevention and rapid rehousing. So in 2021 and 2022, we've had 164 active clients in prevention, which means they were referred, they accessed the program, they received assistance, and then 153 of those exited the program. The average length of stay in the program was 159 days, or a little over 5 months. So that was short-term assistance, and then individuals were exited from the program.
So is it fair to assume then if they've exited the program, they're no longer homeless, or they've just given up?
For this category, this is prevention. So that means they were referred to the program as already being housed, and they just needed some short-term rent assistance to get stabilized and back on their feet. In some cases, it's like, my car broke down this month and I needed to pay for my repairs, which meant I couldn't pay for my rent. And so it's just that short-term assistance to get an individual stabilized. So these are individuals that come to the program already housed and stay housed because of some short-term rent assistance.
And the other one, the statistics are not nearly as good.
If you do the arithmetic of the clients that exited the program and all that kind of stuff versus the cost, what kind of numbers do you come up with?
So for this time period, 2021 and 2022, I did look at what we spent. So for those 2 years, we spent a little over $2.7 million. Combining the clients in those 2 programs, we served about 419 clients in those 2 programs. It comes out to about $6,500 per client. What I want to say about that number, though, too, is that includes our time, HHS time, doing some of these other activities like the point in time count, the 5-year plan, work with the task force, coordinated entry. All of that cost was also included because I just took the overall raw number. So
the numbers you used again are exited program or active clients number?
active clients.
Okay, and the exited numbers are substantially lower than the active clients and the rapid rehousing, right?
Yes.
What's the difference there? I mean, why are we lagging so much in rapid rehousing?
So in rapid rehousing, the state has had a requirement that we serve individuals who are unsheltered. And so all the individuals in this program are coming off of the street, literally homeless, into this program. And the bulk of these individuals are HIN individuals. And so it takes a little bit longer to find housing, obtain housing, and stabilize an individual in housing. So they'll provide the housing stability case management to help an individual with all of those things, to look for housing, to get into housing, and to stay housed. The prevention category, those individuals are already housed. And so some of that work is already done. They're already housed. They just need some brief assistance to stay housed. With rapid rehousing, it's that work of locating, housing, keeping track of an individual who's literally homeless, helping them to get ready to move into housing, sign a lease, be a good tenant, and stabilize in that sense and remain housed.
So I see obtained housing 89 and exited a program 104.
Mhm.
I would have expected them to be the same number.
No, so once an individual obtains housing, they can stay on the program as long as they keep their HIN eligibility. So as long as they keep their HIN eligibility, the state redetermines their eligibility every so often. And as long as they stay caught up on their HIN eligibility, they meet with their DSHS caseworker where they verify that they're doing the things they need to do to are looking at is if the person can return to work. So if you remember one of the reasons they are eligible for HIN is they are determined they're incapacitated to be able to work. They're not able to work for 90 days or more. And so the state is continuing to look at, okay, what is the next step for this individual? Are they permanently not able to work, or can they return to work? And what does that look like if they can return to work? If they're permanently not able to return to work, then they are helping that individual look at longer term solutions, which often is Social Security disability, which takes quite a long time to apply for and get approved for. So that's why they are able to stay on the program until either something changes with their HIN eligibility, which would mean they have been determined that they're able to go back to work, or they're connected to longer term supports.
How do I rationalize the length of time to housing versus the length of stay? It looks like you're averaging over 2 pools.
The length of time to housing is the date they entered the program to the date that they obtained housing. So it took about an average of 4.5 months to get someone off the street and into a unit. The length of stay in the program is how long they stayed in that program. So it includes, when they started, it includes the time period that it took them to obtain the housing and then to stabilize in their housing.
Okay, I'm still confused. So I walk into or somehow and I'm homeless, and it might be 4.5 months before I have a place.
Mhm.
That's what that number says.
Yes,
And then once I'm in there, I'm in a pool of people whose average length of stay is 15 months.
correct.
What happens in the interim 4.5 months with this person with no housing?
The case manager will work with that individual to look at what will it take to get into housing. Sometimes it's getting an ID, sometimes it's
I'm asking, are they sleeping in the street still?
mhm.
Okay,
Or
so
they might have, they might be able to afford a hotel night here and there, but oftentimes are living unsheltered or in their vehicle.
so 4.5 months is there. Okay.
So
Mhm.
they're getting some rental assistance through HIN. Because they have to be HIN eligible, right?
Mhm.
All these folks. So, but that's, HIN's not gonna provide for a month's stay in a hotel.
No, it could,
Be
it
short,
could,
very short-term stay for something like that.
yeah, it could potentially pay for a hotel stay, but as I mentioned, it's been more rare and we've not done it in any type of
Yeah.
quantity.
I'm sure I know the answer to this, but we've heard kids that aren't 18, high school kids, do
Mhm.
they have any resource through this that are struggling?
Not through this. there's a separate program. Let's see. No, actually, I think that one is 18. There's a young adult housing program that CAP operates completely separate from any of this. But I think that's 18 to 24.
Yeah.
I don't think
Would
it
those
goes
be
under
they
18.
can't
McKinney-Vento funds?
I'm sorry.
McKinney-Vento funds support that? Or
Maybe, I mean, it gets
Wage-
really tricky with youth under 18 because they can't sign a lease.
Can't sign a lease and stuff.
Yeah, there's a
A
lot
lot of
of
things working against them.
legal barriers.
Yeah.
I think a lot of youth stay with they couch surf, they stay with friends or extended family. Yeah.
I've always kind of wondered if that isn't an appropriate, a more appropriate alternative than institutionalizing them in a setting that doesn't include family connections.
Mm.
I mean, couch surfing is sort of automatically negative, but doesn't family play an important role? If not the immediate family, family connections,
Yeah.
grandparents and stuff, so it shouldn't automatically be a bad thing to try to avoid. I think depends on the situation, of course, and
Yeah, I
It-
think most people would encourage those natural supports. Assuming those couch surfing environments were supportive. I think we don't always know that, but yeah, be considered a natural support potentially.
So the rapid rehousing program sounds a lot like what the city of Long Beach is trying to do at Hope Village. And would they qualify? I mean, if they made an application, could they qualify for funds for that program? Because they've got a case manager and they've got required treatment and they're providing temporary housing, transitional housing or whatever, and help work them into a more permanent situation.
I'm not sure. We'd have to really flesh that out. I'm not sure what that would look like.
What would cost, I mean, what would prevent them from being eligible for applying for that rapid rehousing program, for example?
Well,
Say for what their capacity is 50, so a grant for a program for 50.
I think it would be, so I could see it working like, if Hope Village wanted to access these funds for rapid rehousing, it would be a next step. So in individuals transitioning out of their home at Hope Village, they potentially could utilize rapid rehousing funds to get into more permanent housing from there. So it could work as a transition out of the program. Yeah, in that sense, it could work.
From what I've heard you speak, the program maybe couldn't qualify, but you have individuals within that program that the state may qualify
Yeah,
once past that.
yeah. And I would say, I mean, right now as it sits, if there's individuals in Hope Village that they could be eligible for this program, we could call through coordinated entry and say, hey, your name came up for a referral to this program. And I know that has happened out of Camp Alabama. We've had people that have been referred into the HEN program, rapid rehousing, out of the camp. So it can happen that way, where it's transitioning, helping to get into more permanent housing that way.
Yeah. So it may not be a program that helps fund Hope Village. It may help individuals that are there move to the next step.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
In terms of other conditions on these contracts, you have equity clauses in there that you have to deal with.
Can you tell me more about what you mean?
There was one, almost $600,000 program a while ago that had language that,
Mm.
you remember, and that was enough to torpedo it at the time.
I think I know what you're talking about. So
We had to
So-
hire a group to promote it within certain ethnic groups, right?
I don't remember the exact details.
But
I know
it was-
that.
I know there was a
Yeah.
group from Vancouver that was coming up to try to fix Calais County's diversity problem.
So,
Yeah.
yes, so I'm glad you brought that up. The eviction prevention funding, it was when that legislation passed, there's a clause written in there that says that you have to, they wanted it built in as a requirement to subcontract 10% of that funding to organizations that are considered, the state calls them by and for organizations, which could be a variety of organizations that serve typical, underserved populations. So it did come up before with some of the eviction prevention funding. What happened at that time, we had issued an RFP to solicit for providers that, or I think it was an RFQ, because you had to be a specific type of organization. And so we sent the solicitation out. We started contracting with the Ethnic Support Council to meet that requirement. And we didn't end up finalizing the contract because the Ethnic Support Council said, you know what, we do this work, we help individuals connect, and if there's language barriers, we help with that. They didn't want to take on the extra administrative work that comes along with grant funding. And so they declined to sign the contract. The state then granted us an exception to that requirement at that time. So that language is connected to the eviction prevention funding coming in this contract. And there is still that exception. We can apply for an exception to say we're not, we are not able to contract with a by and for organization locally. And so that could be approved again, potentially.
And just to repeat, we are not obligated to spend in any one of the categories.
We're not obligated.
It's a consolidated thing
Mhm.
and we're not allowed to say, no, we won't take this part,
Right.
but we're allowed not to spend it. So it amounts to the same thing.
I do see what you're saying. I think the state, if we spent zero of any particular category, I think the state would start saying, okay, what's going on? What are you spending? But like I mentioned, the last few years have had quite a bit of unspent funds that just stay with the state. So I'm not sure what that conversation would look like if we just spent zero of something, but yeah. So. So I had mentioned there's a lot of good discussion. I wanted to kind of give that overview of the grant application and what's included in it. I wrote down a question about the eviction prevention funding in terms of how that could potentially be utilized, maybe with the mediation program. So I'd like to flush that out a little bit with the state to see if that would, meet that funding, or what our options would be there. If there's any other questions or more information I can try to get to provide that would help to make a determination one way or the other, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, just because I thought Commissioner Mortensen's thought on cities applying for a grant to do with some of that rent assistance. I just would like it verified that they have that ability too, because I think that's a good thought on that.
So if we don't apply for the grant, the state would probably open it up and they could apply then, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll open it up.
Yeah, but if it did come to the county, I would like to know they still have that same ability to come and say, hey, we'll do this with it type thing.
Yeah, I think that is, would be allowable for sure. We can issue an RFP and allow entities to submit. One thing I do want to mention, I know we've mentioned, we've talked a couple times about what would happen if the county doesn't submit an application and the state will issue a RFP in the community. These are our dock fees, kind of coming back in a roundabout way. And I think one thing that is appreciated locally is the ability to give input on the programs that, our local dollars are being spent on. If the state issues an RFP and allocates directly to providers, we sort of lose that public input ability. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think that's an important piece.
So to summarize that, these dollars for this grant are only Cowlitz dollars. That is to say, we are paying for this regardless.
Mhm.
Well, a portion of it, the $10 aren't necessarily limited. That's a separate appropriation from the state.
That's state funds. The other,
And they would
portions
find
are-
somebody to administer them, whether the county is involved or not.
they'll keep this whole grant together. So they'll find someone to spend this money in Cowlitz County, whether it's through the county or through a different provider.
The thing that is kind of irritating to me is the take it or leave it. You do the whole thing or you don't do any of it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of coercive that we got to try a year that we just say, go ahead and do it yourself if if you're going to be that way.
Yeah, how do you say that things aren't going to get better following the same old methods that we've been doing for years? I mean, I know we're going to go from 4.5 to 5.9 or anyhow, it'd be a sizable increase. The
Mhm.
demand for these kinds of things is insatiable.
You saw the statistics. It's not working now, is it?
No, it's not.
So.
Yeah.
But it's up to you. We're at a point where we need to decide if we can make the application or not.
Well, is there any harm in applying at this point in time?
No, what would happen, we would submit the application. And then after the legislative session is over, then they would come back with the final award amounts and send a contract for consideration in May or June.
And even after we sign the contract, if we don't spend a dime, it all goes back and it's like we didn't have the grant.
Yes,
Well, your time.
my time.
The
The only.
labor of love for us, right?
Couple of points. One is I mentioned coordinated entry is a big piece of this grant. And a few years back, we had lots of discussion with the board about what to do with coordinated entry. That was at that point in time where we were working with one provider, and then we had some discussion about different ways it could look and decided to go with 3 different providers, and having HHS take on a more active role in coordinated entry, which we have. And so we do have about, I think, 0.5 FTE that just does work on this particular grant. So I just wanted to mention that. And then
But anybody who applies for this grant, other than the county, would still have to meet those requirements, right? They'd still have to have coordinated entry and participate with HMIS, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so.
And so we are facing a decision on the 0.1% sales tax, behavioral health tax,
Mhm.
or mental health tax. Can we use any of this to offset that?
This doesn't pay for
No.
treatment.
I don't think any of it would cross over. Trying to quickly run through the,
Yeah.
Here-
Because I certainly would probably lean towards doing that if I could.
Yeah. I think what you're looking for from us today is questions like you're hearing.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
you're not looking for us to say, let's do it right now, right?
right. We don't have to
Yeah.
make a decision today. I just wanted to have some initial discussion and I can try to get some answers to some of these questions and follow up in a couple weeks.
But again, it's sort of a moot point, isn't it? You apply and you could still refuse the grant when it does come. So,
We could, yeah.
so I wouldn't want to come to you on April 20th and say, well, you got to get it done now. I mean, so
I was thinking the
If we want to do the
25th.
grant, then give her a month to work on it rather
Right,
than half a
right.
month. I mean,
Yeah.
go ahead and make the decision to go for it, but I wasn't,
I think we wait till the 25th.
What day of the week is that?
well, as long as that means the answer is no.
Yeah, we could work on the application and have that ready. When to submit the grant, there's one page of the application that's it's a certifications page. So they ask that the chair of the board sign that particular page to submit with the grant application. That's the piece we would need from you in order to make that submission. So.
Any other questions?
Hmm.
Great, thank you. When do we want to schedule you to come back with all these wonderful answers?
Well, I'll try, I can see what I can get before next week. I have a work session with you next week as well on a different topic, but if I have answers by then, I can share it at that time if that works.
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So make sure that gets listed under your agenda quick or whatever you use to submit topics.
Topics,
Yeah,
okay.
make sure both of them follow up on this discovery. And your other one, that's the youth housing thing, isn't it? Is that-
No, it's developmental disabilities contract amendment.
Any other questions for Gina?
No. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next on our agenda is a request for an executive session to discuss contract negotiations. And we'll set aside about 15 minutes to go over that. We'll take a recess. We don't expect to make any decisions during the executive session, but we will have time to consider other proposals when we get back. So go ahead and mute. We have returned from our executive session. No decisions were made. And provide one last call for any other items to be brought to our attention. Right. Anything for miscellaneous, gentlemen? All right, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.